if I told you we finally come up with a magic pill that will improve memory and make your brain grow, everyone would want it. And if I told you it's free and you could do it with a friend and you only had to do it 3 times a week, people would say, sure, where do I get it?
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
Welcome back to Better Thinking Podcast. Please remember to subscribe and share with others. It makes a big difference for me and the channel. Today I've got Alan Castel, who's a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of California in Los Angeles. He studies learning, memory and aging and is interested in how people can selectively remember important information. His new book is on Better with Age, the psychology of successful aging, and he talks today about how you and I can do some practical things to improve our memory and more so live better lives as we get older. It's absolutely fantastic to hear Alan's viewpoints and his studies that have come out of his lab. I'm sure you're going to love it. Welcome back to Better Thinking Podcast. Today's guest is Professor Alan Castel, who is from the Department of Psychology in the University of California in Los Angeles, and he studies learning, memory and aging and many other things. He's got a fascinating new book that's come out recently, Better with Age, the Psychology of Successful Aging. Really excited to talk about this because this is, a little bit of an area that I'm starting to move into aging, that sort of plus 40 zone. So welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Is it okay if I just call you Alan instead?
Absolutely. Please do.
Lovely, lovely. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested into this area, where this kind of book has come from and, all the work that you've done in this space.
Certainly. Well, I'm a professor at UCLA and I study memory and aging. And as a younger child, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, my older grandparents, and I noticed that their memory was changing. They'd confuse my name with my brother's name. But I also noticed they're very good at remembering certain things very well, especially the prices of groceries they had recently purchased. So it's clear that memory changes in a variety of ways. And I was always impressed with their sense of humor, how they became less inhibited as they became older. So they would tell me amazing stories. And, I think I developed some positive impressions of what it means to grow old, even though I was aware that they also had some challenges in their life. So I think from there, that led me down this road of, trying to understand and appreciate how we get older.
It's an incredible space because I've started to notice a family member of mine in particular struggling with some aspects of memory. But the one thing that he holds is this incredible capacity for dates, that go back to, the 60s, the 80s, knowledge about, things that he's read about, the 20s and so on. It's this incredible thing about dates and times, but in other things, obviously, with age, maybe the short-term memory stores are starting to struggle. It's just become such a pronounced thing that I've started to, be aware of, so I can appreciate that.
I think we all start to notice how our memory changes, especially when it starts failing us. And there certainly are things that we are good at. Some people are very good at remembering faces or dates, but struggle with names or forget a simple to-do list. And I think that illustrates just how memory works and how memory doesn't work. Memory is not like a video camera. We can't always trust it, nor should we, even when we're younger. And one point I make in the book is as we get older, we're probably more selective about how we use our memory and maybe even more thoughtful, that we know we can't remember things that are not of real interest to us. We might remember trivia that's interesting to us. We might forget the names of people we've met recently, even though we remember their profession or where we know them from. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have dementia. It probably just means that our memory is working in a way that, it'll tend to work like as we get older. And there are things we can do to improve our memory, but we shouldn't expect to have a perfect memory.
What are some of the myths? Obviously, there's this kind of idea that as you age, your memory just gets worse. And it's almost like this. The idea is it's just about decline, decline, decline. What are some of the myths around memory and aging?
Well, there are certainly some truth to memory starting to change with age, but to call them all declines is not accurate because some things do decline. It might be harder to remember certain things because you have more names in your brain. So there's just more interference, there's more confusion. But some things certainly also get better with age. Many older adults report high levels of life satisfaction, even if they're struggling physically or have challenges with their memory. So older adults might have more confidence about oneself, such as greater self-esteem, better emotion regulation, and are more interested in pursuing their own passions and less concerned about what other people think.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of space. Being a psychologist, this emotional regulation, not caring about what people think is, really kind of big ticks when it comes to mental health, at least from my perspective. It seems to come with, maybe this word that we use as, maturity, but maybe there's a memory component in there too about, how one selectively kind of views the world or how they use their memory. Is there any sort of connections of data in that space?
Well, I think people look back on their lives and realize that maybe they've forgotten certain things or maybe they've encountered challenges in life, but some things matter and some things don't. And it certainly does matter what other people think of us. So it's not like we just don't care anymore, but we know, not to sweat the small things. And we know what's important to us. Sometimes that means having, friends, face-to-face meetings, as opposed to having a lot of Facebook friends. There's certainly differences there. And I think as we get older, we become more appreciative of the things that are important to us, whether it's friends, family, bird watching, curiosity, whatever you're into, and care less about the things that we might have worried about when we were younger, but realize we either don't have much control over or it doesn't really matter as much as we thought.
There's very much something to say about curiosity and in memory. Having looked at some of your work prior to this podcast, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. It's kind of, I suppose, fascinated me because I've never been a great academic by any means, but I remember in college I was asked in college in Australia, year 11 and 12, I was asked to do a presentation and. Not being an academic, I wasn't kind of participating very much, but I could very easily do a presentation on a rotary engine or a Wankel engine at the time, and I still have data in my head that Felix Wankel was the originator who created the concept in 1957. He built the first Wankel engine. All this sort of arbitrary information. And I'm not someone who prides myself on random information, but it was something I was very curious because I was a young boy, liked loud engines and fast cars, and the Wankel engine or the we call a rotary engine was a tough engine, and so I kind of knew all the aspects about it. There was this curiosity that drew me to it. But if you brought me into a physics class, I would kind of, just switch off, so to speak. There's this kind of curiosity component.
Yeah, and I think we're only going to remember things that we have some organizational framework to put things into place. So I think whether it's bird watching or engines or stamp collecting, you name it, to one person it can be very arbitrary, dry, and boring, but to someone else it can be phenomenally interesting. And sometimes it has to do with your background. It might have to do with your motivations at the time, which change with age. And we've tried to study it by looking at curiosity, like what sorts of things spark your curiosity. And for you, it might be engines. For me, it might be bikes. For a young child, it might be, whatever toy gun they have. And whether you can scaffold new learning based on what you know already. So it's unfortunate that you know all about these engines and the history and how they work, but then you walk into a physics class and everything seems dry and boring. And if you could somehow, or the teacher or the book somehow incorporate some of that practical learning with some of the theory, then it leads to these kind of breakthroughs. And we found that older adults, especially as we get older, we're more inclined to remember things we're curious about, and less inclined to focus on things we don't care about. And I think that's an important life lesson, because if we can't remember everything, it makes more sense to focus on the things that we really want to learn more about. So we did a study where we asked people questions like, what was the first product to have a barcode? And I want you to guess, but I also want you to tell me how curious you are to learn the answer. So I'll let you play along. What do you think the first product was to have a barcode?
When I heard that question first, the answer was, I have no idea. But I did think to myself, will I actually ever remember this? And I have remembered it, but I'm not a curiosity person, but that's probably because it's a recency effect. But I would say I have no idea.
And now, how curious are you to learn? You might be very curious.
I'm not.
You're not. And that's a really good predictor of how likely you'll remember the answer a week from now. So I'll tell you the answer is Wrigley's chewing gum. And you might think, okay, great, that's a little factoid I'll probably never need to know, and I really don't care. How about which country was the first country to give women the right to vote?
And that one I'll definitely remember. And the reason why is, being in Australia, yes, we're very, very much always in competition with our neighbours, New Zealand.
Of course.
So when I heard that, I had a scaffold, which is what you're talking about, a memory scaffold. And I'm like, damn it, they got to it before us.
There you go. So that's your competitive spirit kicking in, but it also your geography or your awareness or something. These are questions most people don't know the answer to, but I think in this case, either you're interested in history or politics or just the geography that, leads you to, both guess the answer and get it correct. And older adults are more likely to remember the things they're most curious about, and they're also more likely to forget the things they're least curious about. And I think that's important as we get older, is kind of focusing on what we care about and not sweating the other things, forgetting the other things. And it's unfortunate because when we're a student, we're expected to pack our brains with a lot of information. But I think it's almost like a museum curator, that as we get older, we kind of make sure our museum, which might be very cluttered in our mind, is kind of kept clean in terms of, recalling the things we're most curious about and we care the most about, and letting the other stuff kind of gather dust.
It almost seems that there is a natural advantage to that, or maybe we've structured our society in that way, where we ask older persons who are maybe more emotionally stable, who have a greater capacity to select their focus and maybe only attend to certain things rather than be overwhelmed with so much other data, to maybe inform policies and other things that are quite complex. And the younger people, we sit at universities and just pack our brains with anything and everything. I'm not sure. Is there a biological story to some of this?
I think it's an important question: is what is knowledge, what is creativity, and who do we turn to for advice? And typically we turn to people who have experience. And oftentimes that is older people, but sometimes it's a younger person who's more experienced with Instagram. But it could be an older person who's more experienced because they've seen more mistakes, they've made more mistakes, so they know how to handle kind of a complex problem or social situation, or sometimes knowing that there isn't an immediate answer is a good bit of insight. But we've certainly found that, under some conditions, older adults, in fact, may be more creative because they're less inhibited. They'll consider multiple perspectives. They'll realize that there's not one right answer. Whereas when we're younger, we're kind of searching for the right answer. How can we move on quickly, and might not appreciate how complex the world can be.
So there's a creativity component that comes with this as well. How do we define creativity, or what's the idea around creativity? How would you describe that?
Well, creativity involves being able to solve problems, sometimes have insights that others might not have, and often it involves drawing on prior experiences, even though we think of creativity as these like sudden bursts of insight. But the truth is, a lot of creative inventions are modeled or based on other inventions or other things we have experience with. So just by virtue of having more experience, older adults have more to draw on, which can lead to, good insight, innovation, and sometimes not being afraid to kind of push the envelope a little bit or, try something new. And those are not things you typically think of like, oh, if I want creativity, I turn to the younger generation. But in fact, there's a lot to be learned from older adults who've experienced things, made mistakes, seen how things work and don't work, and, are not afraid to suggest or even try new things.
It's kind of interesting because sometimes we look to our younger generation to push the envelope that in some sense they're not burdened by beliefs or limiting beliefs. They might become, virtuous around and potentially even righteous around some certain ideas. And so they push the boundaries and maybe we don't see that as much with some older persons. Is that kind of how our memory also influences us, where there can be those limiting factors around what I can conceive or how open-minded I might be? Does that have any sort of impact over the age sort of range?
It certainly can. And, I think as we get older, we certainly fall into habits and routines. These are things that we enjoy, appreciate. We go to the same restaurants. We, do things the same way because it works. And sometimes those habits and routines, the structure, that might lead to greater happiness or stability as we get older, whereas younger people might have less of that, and they don't know what they're doing tomorrow. Or and I think that can lead to a different approach. But I think it's also important to realize that we need to be flexible in terms of our thinking. So just because we've done something one way doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. And I illustrate this in my book, talking about a pilot who has to land an airplane in an emergency scenario. All the engines have gone out. He's just taken off from the airport, and he can either turn back to the airport and land the plane, attempt to land the plane, even though he's gliding, or he can do an emergency landing on the Hudson River, a water landing, which no one's ever done before. What do you do? And if you're a younger pilot, you have fast reaction times, you have a good memory. Whereas if you're an older pilot, not that you have more experience landing planes on water, but you might be more likely to understand some of the concepts that are relevant. And this is what happened, with Captain Sully Sullenberger, who was able to land a plane on water, first time it's ever done, and save all these people, even though he was taking enormous risks, and it involved kind of a leap of faith and a form of creativity. So even if we have these habits and routines, and you might expect just with more experience you're better at doing things, this was a novel situation and it required kind of some creative problem solving. And under those circumstances, maybe you do want an older pilot who's able to kind of handle and regulate their emotions so that they can carry out a very unique and life-saving procedure.
I do remember that story, but I don't know any of the details. Have you heard of the pilot's sort of accounts, his thought process, how he, described that situation and that decision-making sort of process, how he sort of, I suppose, brought in his training experience?
It was, there's a great movie if you're interested in the Hollywood version called Sully, but there's certainly a few accounts, and he describes how, while this was very stressful, he had to make some quick decisions. He had a co-pilot that he, I wouldn't say consulted, but they worked together, a younger co-pilot, but he had to make this decision. He had to eventually make it fairly quickly, and he described it as kind of, he had made a lot of investments into his bank of experiences with all the training he's had in the past, and now he was making one giant withdrawal, where he was now taking everything that he'd learned, and now he's going to synthesize it and understand the physics and how he could, in fact, land a plane on water, even though it's something he'd never done before. And a lot of people just assume, if you're older, you have more experience and more knowledge, and that's what makes you better. But in this case, he'd never done this. You really have to use all of that knowledge in a practical way to solve a problem. And I think it also involves emotional regulation, that you could get very stressed having to decide and make this decision. And he had to use his skill and courage, and I think of it as like high pressure creativity to do something that no one had ever done before.
Yeah, wow. So this really isn't him being able to draw an experience because he doesn't have experience of landing a plane on water, 35 times in practice. This is his first attempt, and it's the conceptual, I suppose, the understanding, maybe if we even talk about it from a curiosity perspective of how the physics are working and how a plane is designed, and how to slow it down as much as possible without having, thrust and God knows what was also being involved in all of that. This is just my clumsy account of trying to put something together. But he used just knowledge to synthesize all of that and come up with an idea to test for the first time.
Yeah, and I think, we're not all captains of airplanes, but just the fact that you have knowledge on how engines work, if your car breaks down tomorrow and you're in the middle of the desert, you'd have some ideas as to how you might be able to fix things in a pinch. And I think you might think of older people as being more set in their ways, or, they have knowledge, but, they might be clumsy with a computer. The truth is, an older mind has solved a lot of problems and seen a lot of, mistakes as well. So I think you don't want to say benefits to getting older, but there may be benefits to kind of having an older person working with a younger person and just noticing the different styles, because I think it's almost like you can use both to their maximum potential. And I think we should think of aging as in terms of changes and abilities, not declines.
I love that concept, and you've already said it a couple of times that, this isn't a measurement of decline or one being better or worse, but rather saying, how does an aging mind, work and operate, and what benefits are in there? What are the changes from, a younger mind to an older mind? What are the primary things that you have, studied in your lab and that's featured in your book? What are some of the kind of our takeaways, in all of your studies, if we synthesize a little bit of that too?
Our lab studies memory and how it becomes selective as we get older. And I think one takeaway is that even if we might not remember as much as we used to, older adults can selectively remember what's important. And that could be different things. It could be what you're curious about. It could be if you're taking care of a child, remembering the allergies that the child might have. It's almost like being responsible in your remembering. Whereas when we're younger, we kind of remember lots of stuff, the lyrics to songs, the phone number of a friend, all of these things. But what are the things we really need to know? And I think that's what we call metacognition, is being aware of how our memory changes, both declines, but also compensation, and how older adults can use that to function actually fairly efficiently. So we're really interested in what sorts of things older adults can remember, how older adults do this, and some of the activities we can do as we get older, and I can talk about those, that can ensure that we keep our brains sharp.
Maybe you can kind of go into that space about what are the contributors to a sharper mind. What are the things that we can go out and do to optimize, so to speak, whatever where our natural range is at. So, if that's the right language, how do we optimize?
Yeah, absolutely. People often think, to keep your brain sharp, you should do crossword puzzles or things that are stimulating. And there may be some truth to that, but there's not a lot of solid research that would support crossword puzzles in particular, because as we get older, our verbal knowledge and vocabulary actually improves with age. Sometimes, you have the tip of the tongue effect where you can't remember something but that's just because there's a lot in there. So I think, crossword puzzles are not something that we need to do to stay sharp, but maintaining an active lifestyle is really important. And that doesn't just mean rushing around doing lots of things. It means selecting the things you're interested in doing and try and improve, whether it's piano, gardening, socializing. An active lifestyle could and should also involve some level of physical activity, such as walking, biking, dancing, and social connections, meeting friends, professional colleagues, and then cognitive stimulation, whether it's reading, listening to music, traveling. Many people say they feel that retirement allows them more time to do the things they really want to do without the stress of a packed schedule doing the things they don't enjoy. So I think it's important to have an active lifestyle, a stimulating lifestyle. And when people ask about what can I do to keep my memory sharp, I tell them, the best research out there has shown that physical exercise, such as walking, improves memory more so than any other, form of cognitive stimulation. And there's not much out there that we can do that benefits memory more than walking. And this is based on a very, solid line of research that has shown, in one case, they had two groups of individuals over the age of 60. One group they randomly assigned to walk 3 times a week for 40 minutes. And the other group stretched. So they're not doing as much cardiovascular activity, but they're stretching their muscle 3 times a week for 40 minutes. And they followed up with these groups, 6 months later and a year later, and they found the walking group performed much better on various tests of memory and cognition compared to the stretching group. And then they did some neuroimaging. So they looked at the parts of the brain that were really involved in memory. And this is typically the hippocampus. It's right in the center of the brain. And the hippocampus declines by about 1% in volume every year after the age of 50. So your brain, starts to shrink, and that leads to these declines in memory. But what they found in the walking group is that the hippocampus, the volume had actually increased by 2% over that 1 year period. So literally your brain is growing. You're reversing these signs of aging. And that's amazing. I mean, it shows that our physical, output can make our brain grow, or at least offset some of the changes that might happen with age. And so I think these findings are very exciting. They've been replicated in many different ways. There's nothing specific about walking. If you're biking, swimming, dancing, anything that gets your heart rate up and gets more blood to your brain probably leads to these effects, because it's cleaning out the brain. It's providing the brain with the nourishment it needs. And I think these effects are really important, because if I told you we finally come up with a magic pill that will improve memory and make your brain grow, everyone would want it. And if I told you it's free and you could do it with a friend and you only had to do it 3 times a week, people would say, sure, where do I get it? And the truth is you can get it, anywhere, anytime, any place. You can do it on a treadmill. Some of these studies are done with mall walkers who get up early in the morning and go to the shopping mall because it's snowing outside. And there can be a social aspect to it, walking with a friend. Maybe if you have a partner who will motivate you to walk, that can be helpful. So I think it's really impressive, because it shows that there's a lot we can do to improve our memory, and it's not quite as we might expect. It's not just doing crossword puzzles.
That's absolutely remarkable. A 2% increase over a 12-month period just walking. That's kind of if you had that pill, you'd probably be getting the Nobel Peace Prize, saying you've achieved a lifetime of amazing medical advancement, and yet we've got it available to us.
Yeah, and I think we always have had it available. I think our lifestyle leads to a more sedentary approach. I'm sitting down right now. I think there's a lot of brain games on the market that involve more screen time, sitting in front of a computer playing these games. And the truth is those games are very addictive. They're fun to play, and you do get better at those games, and they might change your brain in some way, but they don't lead to what we call transfer, meaning they don't change your brain in a way that allows you to remember things like where you put your keys or the name of your colleague. So you're not improving the types of memory that you really care about. And if anything, I think there's a cost, because now you're spending more time in front of a screen, less time for walking, and then there's that decline that if you're not walking, your memory starts to change. And
really, I think, when we all consider memory, we want to know about it. How does it functionally improve our life? Not, am I advancing on some arbitrary, screen as to how many things I can remember or something? At the end of the day, I need to know where my keys are, and not score, 120 on that, level 4 of that game. It doesn't change anything for me. How did the crossword puzzle, the Sudoku puzzle type idea come about to kind of say that this is, I mean, in some sense, it's quoted quite often, is a great tool for improving your memory. You got to keep your mind, you got to keep flexing your mind, pushing it, doing crosswords or whatever it is. How did that become popular?
I think it's intuitive that if you want to keep your brain sharp, you should keep it active, and that is true. But crossword puzzles are so specific, whether it's math, anything that keeps your brain working is a good thing. But the truth is those effects might be quite small or they might be specific. And I always tell people that there's probably not one thing you should do to keep your memory sharp. There's many things. So, stay active socially, do crossword puzzles, do any type of puzzle. Anything that's challenging, learning a new language, traveling. And then I think probably people think of the brain as, a muscle, so you need to exercise it. But physical exercise brings a lot of blood to the brain and involves a lot of coordination as well. So I think, this mind-body connection is important. People think of the mind as the mind, but it is connected to your body, and there's an intimate relationship there. And the other thing I tell people is that even though you're concerned about your memory, probably what you should be more concerned about is balance. Because as we get older, especially after the age of 60, we're more likely to suffer from a fall. In fact, in the US, people over the age of 60, 1 in 3 people will suffer a fall that results in a broken hip, a broken collarbone. And if you fall, you're going to be out of commission for a couple of weeks or months even, and then you're not walking. And if you're not walking, we know your hippocampus is going to shrink even more. Your memory starts to decline. So it's really a cascade. And so just staying on your feet is really important. And some of the things I tell people to train balance are very simple. Standing on one leg for 30 seconds, seeing if you can do it. And a lot of people think their balance is fine. They haven't had a fall. But then they realize when they try this very simple exercise, they start to stumble after 5 or 10 seconds. And imagine if you're getting out of bed in the middle of the night, you have to use the bathroom and it's dark and you trip over a carpet and you have to regain your balance. If you don't have good balance and you're not aware of it, you'll fall. So I think balance training is important, staying on your feet, staying active, and that'll keep your memory sharp. Whereas things like, brain games and crossword puzzles make you think that you're doing the right thing. And there's certainly some merits to them, but that's not the only thing you should be doing.
And it makes a lot of sense, because if I were to say I'm going to get really, really fit, so I'm just going to go out and, do a lot of exercise on one bicep, and I'll just do that over and over and over and over and over and over again, I might get pretty damn good with one bicep and I might have a fairly impressive bicep, but the rest of my body is certainly not fit. And what you're kind of suggesting is that purely activity, by the function of blood flow and, allowing the biological world to do its thing, to flush out the brain of toxins and whatever else rubbish, is in there, and just stimulate, I suppose, good flow of oxygen and the like. It rebounds as a whole rather than as a one bicep type scenario.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And I think that, by focusing so specifically, you might even lead to this wear and tear. Some people think, jogging, but jogging over long periods of time can hurt your knees. So it's good to have diversity in terms of what you do. Everything's connected in a way. And I think this idea that physical exercise, why would it benefit your brain, could be multifaceted. It probably, if you exercise during the day, then you're going to sleep better at night. And one thing that does tend to decline as we get older is our quality of sleep. We might spend more time sleeping, but we don't get the deeper levels and REM sleep that we, used to in terms of the amount of minutes. But if you're getting some physical exercise, you're more likely to sleep well. So, if you sleep well, we know sleep is related to the consolidation of memories. So all of these things are connected, and I think it's important to lead this kind of balanced life where your diet should be balanced. There's not one thing you need to eat. It's not all about blueberries. It's not all red wine or chocolate. It's probably a collection of things, and we need to focus on the effect size. Like you said, what is clinically significant or important to us, because, doing crossword puzzles might help for some things, but I think walking or balance training can really keep you on your feet. And that's kind of what you need to be doing when you're 60, 70, 80. And these are habits. So starting them early in life, when you're 20, 30, 40, can be very important. But also knowing you might have to change things. If you've played racquetball or squash, you might not be playing these games when you're 60 or 70. So do you have a group of friends you can walk with, or play golf or ping pong or any activity that keeps you active?
You mentioned a couple of times, or at least this is how I interpret it, about being active, also meaning learning something or stretching yourself, trying to develop a skill where there's kind of an acquisition of a skill set. Am I reading that correctly? That has reasonable merit. That when you're trying to learn something new, it somehow stimulates better all round memory or cognitive capacity.
Certainly, we're still making neurons and connections as we get older, and those things are stimulated by challenging yourself. So, it's good to try new things. It's good to speak to people who share a different opinion. It doesn't mean you need to learn Japanese. A lot of people think it's about learning a second or third language. There's definitely ways you can stimulate your mind and your body that can allow for this neurogenesis. And I think it's important, but we also fall into our habits of doing the same thing every day, being around the same people. So things like traveling or anything that involves novelty can be both challenging but rewarding for your brain.
So even like intellectual debates or stimulating ideas. Last night I was watching a debate by I think it was Richard Dawkins and Deepak Chopra, and they were it looked like they were sparring, so to speak. But it was each time either one of them opened up their mouth, you'd side with them. You go, that's a really intelligent argument, and then the other one would come across. You go, oh gosh, that's really kind of sounds intelligent too, and they'd just be going backwards and forwards, and it was incredibly intriguing, like an hour and a half of just this intensity. Is that something that I suppose curiosity comes about, is maybe another feature there as well. But is it kind of like being, trying to stretch your mind, even if it's just purely on holding different ideas?
Absolutely. I think having some variety, trying new things, being around people who share your opinion but also disagree with you, doing something challenging, something that you wouldn't normally do, can be very stimulating and rewarding, but it can also be, intimidating. So I think a lot of us get stuck in a rut. We keep doing what we keep doing. And in some ways that can be beneficial, but it's good to try something new, even if it's just trying a different ice cream flavor, talking to people who you might not normally talk to, volunteer, try something, that you haven't done before, even if you're not going to be skilled at it or an expert. It challenges your brain, and it makes sure that you don't get caught in these, routines.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about this world of, Alzheimer's, or the world of dementia, moving into, I suppose, that older age? That's a place that I think a lot of people, including myself, are really in the dark around. We don't really understand it too much. We tend to probably just grab little bits and pieces of information around, pack them together without any real knowledge about it. Can you talk about those? And I know there's some similarities, some overlap in those two, but there's also differences too.
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of us are in the dark about what dementia and Alzheimer's disease really mean, and how it, what is the cause and what is the cure. The number of people who have Alzheimer's disease, which is one form of dementia, it's the most common, is projected to rise, but that might be because we're just living longer. And if we're living longer, we want to add years to our life, not just, a time in life where we can't function well. So some studies show that there actually is a decline in the proportion of people who are developing Alzheimer's disease compared to a few decades ago, which I think is very interesting. And one hypothesis or idea is that higher levels of education and doing things that can prevent or delay the disease, such as walking, as I mentioned, or eating better, being socially connected, might allow us to kind of prevent this disease from setting in. Because once you do have these, plaques and tangles and all other signs, it's very hard to reverse the disease. So I'm not sure it sounds awful to say they might never be a cure, but there could also be a way that we can prevent this before it happens. And a lot of these things are things that we might know about already, or we're just not doing enough of it. We're not aware that walking and physical exercise are not just so we can stay slim or keep our heart healthy. It might really keep our brain healthy. And what we do earlier in our lives and the habits we develop can protect us from developing dementia in older age. And just to give you an example, this is again a correlation, but there is some work showing that if you speak more than one language, you're less likely to develop dementia. And the idea is that if you have multiple languages in your brain, you're inhibiting one language, you're activating another, you're doing more of this mental gymnastics, and that could be beneficial in terms of keeping your brain sharp. And again, it's a correlation, but there could be benefits to learning a language both early in life or even later in life. So that sort of stimulation might be important and might actually protect us from, some of the things that can happen in dementia.
Hvala, baš mi je drago da znam.
I love it.
I just say thank you. It's good to, it feels good to know that. It's fascinating.
Good, keep practicing.
That's quite incredible. It's probably a gift that my parents didn't even realize that they're giving me.
Sure.
We speak sort of Serbian in the household. When we visit each other, speak with each other.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it's a protective mechanism too.
There can certainly be benefits. Again, it's a correlation. We don't know what causes what, and it's hard to experimentally test. And you also might find, which is some insight, that as you get older, you revert back to your mother tongue or your first language. Or I've seen people, including my grandparents, who had dementia, and they started to almost forget their English and go back to their first language. Or if you're stressed or under pressure, you kind of focus on your first language that you're more accustomed to or more familiar with. So it might be that languages just give you more layers to work with. And as you develop dementia, it might eat away at certain layers, but the more protective layers you have, the longer you can fight off this disease.
And language must take an awful lot of I'm not sure if this is the right word, but space. The complexity of language must overlay so many things. The way that we not only speak and communicate, but the way we interpret, the way that we, perceive the world. That there are words that you find in one language that you don't in another. The way that you, I suppose, convert one language into another in translation. There must be just a huge need for hardware, additional hardware, or at least use of memory that maybe stimulates many repetitions as a course of an everyday type of experience. If you've got two or more languages, maybe that's just a fantasy story, but it seems that just talking with you at the moment that there's potentially just more processing going on than if you only have one language.
It's possible. I think, the brain is an amazing thing. And even though there are parts of the brain that are very involved in language, the truth is most things are distributed all over your brain and inside in ways that can change how you process things. So, if you speak multiple languages, you might have different sorts of spatial skills than someone who doesn't speak more languages. You might think of things in different ways, not necessarily better or worse. So I think it just adds another component. And I don't think it's specific to language. If you have some special skill, if you're a pianist, if whatever you do, it adds to kind of the cognitive reserve that can build up in your brain. And the more access you have to these skills, the more you can really challenge yourself in ways that can be helpful.
Yeah, can you also talk a little bit about, you mentioned the social aspect. I suppose the opposite of being socially connected is loneliness, or sort of disconnection that often comes with depression in the psychology world. Can you talk about any research that connects loneliness or social connectivity with memory?
Certainly, it's the scariest part about getting older is that many people don't realize when they retire or move, they leave behind a large social network. And a lot of older adults, even though we think of, the research shows that a lot of older adults have high levels of life satisfaction or even happiness, they will comment that the saddest and hardest thing is that their friends are passing away. So there's just fewer people around. And so I think the same thing can happen when you retire or move away from a city that you're very familiar with. You leave behind these social interactions that can be protective in a way. And even just occasional small talk at our workplace can be an important part of being socially connected. People notice when things change if they see you every day, if you're going to the coffee shop every day. And I think there's some stigma associated with saying you're lonely. So people don't necessarily talk about it, and it makes it a silent issue. And being around family, friends, even pets can help, but often people need to have regular social interactions that make them feel valued or understood. And sometimes just volunteering, going to a group exercise class, going to the library regularly where you have some small conversations can be a great way to stay connected.
It's really fascinating because I don't know whether my attention's becoming more and more selective or my curiosity has peaked in a certain space, but I just see this social connection within, mental health as being jumping out everywhere. That, today we're talking about memory improving with social connection. When we talk about drug addiction, with work such as, Johan Hari's work around, bonding, social connectivity is such an important part of, I suppose, protection against, going further into, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and the like. Speaking with clients, connectivity is such an important part in how they, I suppose, prognosis, how likely they are to recover from, despair and difficult situations. That this social thing plays such an important role, and here it is again in memory.
No, absolutely. I think we think of the biology of aging. We notice aches and pains, and we talk about how our body changes. But the truth is, the people who are around every day influence how we feel. And it's whether it's a spouse, a friend, colleagues. These are the people that really make a difference in our life. And sometimes we're not aware of it. And it's actually, especially, it differs for men and women, but often, men, when they retire or leave the workforce, suffer a major, hit in terms of their social connections. And, it's hard to then look for friends or, join a group. But that can be very important, especially for someone who's very connected or was connected to their profession for a long period of time. And I think these social connections are undervalued. I think in a day and age where we can jump on email or Facebook, we can certainly connect with people, but it's the quality of those connections. It's not necessarily how frequently you're, chatting with people online or whether you have hundreds of Facebook friends. It's the quality of these relationships. Are these people aware of your health and what you're thinking of and your worries and your concerns? Whereas a lot of, social network or Facebook, you're kind of broadcasting all the great things that are happening to you. And it's not a fair assessment of, what's really going on in your life. So having some of that real face-to-face contact is very important.
And what happens, if you're able to explain, what happens with depression and memory? A day does not go by in my work in the clinic here where a client doesn't talk about, their memory failing them, particularly, the more depressed someone becomes. Is there any research that talks about the biological aspects of that? Is it simply that our as the word suggests, everything becomes depressed, where even our brain slows down, that or is it an intentional thing? Is it I've got despair, I don't care about encoding anything because nothing bloody matters. I'm probably not going to be around, so who gives a shit?
You certainly have more experience seeing it at the front lines. I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I think depression and anxiety can certainly kind of overcome a lot of these effects that are important that allow us to remember things effectively. Sometimes it can influence depression, anxiety can influence sleep. It can lead to fewer social connections, maybe less exercise. So there's a lot of things we can do, but we might not be inclined to do if we're depressed or anxious or don't want to be around people or we're avoiding things. And so in some ways, it's not surprising that memory would take a hit, given all the things we've talked about that improve memory might, become harder to engage, such as physical exercise, social connection, getting good sleep. So I think, dealing with the underlying issues that lead to depression and anxiety could then eventually lead to memory improvements, but it's very challenging.
Mm-hmm. What can I expect that's going to improve or sharpen as I get older? What are some of the advantages that might occur between 40 to 60, 60 to 70? When we talk about change, with change we might sort of look at how do I optimize these benefits of change, that every situation can be utilized in a particular way. What can I expect will occur? For me, I'm about to tip into the 40s, and to me, it seems like these are the prime years. That I've got incredible resource of knowledge that I've accumulated, over 40 years. I feel like I'm only now starting to open my mind to all these other possibilities. I feel like I've become more and more of a geek as I've gone along and listening to lectures and so on and so forth. Is this curiosity factor starting to show up? What can I expect from your opinion?
Well, that's one thing I try and touch on in this book, Better with Age, because there are things that can change and actually make our lives more rewarding as we get older. And many people think about aging in negative ways, but life can be very satisfying, especially when we reflect back on our lives, what we've done, and what we still want to accomplish in our 60s, 70s, and 80s. And in fact, levels of happiness tend to reach an all-time low right around midlife, 40, 45. So I think some things we can look for. Well, both oh no and oh good. I have something to look forward to, because if you're 40, 45 and you're thinking, I'm not that happy, even though I have a great job and a family and a house and all the things that should make me happy, you might realize that your emotional regulation might get actually better, so that you appreciate these things. Even if things get even more complicated in your life, you might be better at figuring out what's important in that. In your 50s and 60s, you might actually be happier if you take care of your body and your mind. So that's really why I wrote this book, is to talk about the psychology of successful aging. And it's not intended for people who are 70, 80 necessarily. They might have even mastered some of these things. It's intended for people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who are trying to understand, I'm trying to forget some things. I'm not as good at multitasking as I used to be. Well, I still feel like I'm in great shape, but I put on a few pounds. And so I really try and emphasize that physical exercise, balance, and I have, a whole kind of checklist of things that you should be on the lookout for and things that you can do, so that as you get older, and even when you're young, you can start thinking about these things, whether it's learning a second language, being stimulated in your life, really value the social connections, staying in touch with friends, because when you retire, even though we never seem to have enough time to stay in touch, those are the people who know you the best. So I really tell people that, to summarize, I talk about the ABCs of successful aging. And A has to do with attitudes. And oftentimes our culture doesn't really value older age. And so our attitudes about aging can influence how we age. If you think positively about aging, you might be more inclined to do things that are healthier, to walk, to engage with other people. And that's really one message in my book, Better with Age, The Psychology of Successful Aging. I hope reading about inspiring older adults and the latest research on successful aging can show people at any age what to expect, what to hopefully enjoy if you age well, as we're all getting older. So in terms of these ABCs, A is really attitude. It's our attitude about aging that matters. And if you have a negative attitude about aging, you're more inclined to then not take care of yourself because you expect bad things to happen as you get older. And then these things can happen to you. So it is a bit circular. So changing these attitudes, even at an early age, if you have role models of people who've aged well, if you understand that even if you're old and you have aches and pains, you're still, in a position to be physically active, that can be incredibly important. So A is attitude, but also, as we talked about, staying active and also adapting, because there's going to be a lot of change in our life as we get older. And so you'll have to change and be aware that, life is not all about routines. And B is balance. And we talked also about balance. Physical balance is incredibly important, and training balance, being aware of potential falls, but also balance in our life. And I think in midlife, we're especially focused on our jobs, our careers, our family. We always feel like we never have enough time for anything. So achieving this balance can be challenging. And I think as we get older, we have a better opportunity to understand how to balance our life. Maybe we realize we want to retire and spend more time with our family, but then maybe we realize spending more time with our family is not what we're not going to devote all of our time. We need a hobby, or we need something that gives us value. So finding that balance becomes important, and it's something we probably struggle with our entire lives. And then C is being connected, and being connected to the people we love and care about, but also the things, the activities that we love and care about and value. And I think if you're passionate about something, if you're connected to something, whether it's a volunteer group, a pet, traveling, that can really give you a lot of reward. And so finding what is important to connect to, and also what things you want to disconnect from, whether it's junk food, whether it's bad habits, whether it's people who you don't enjoy being around. It's a question of selectivity and kind of connecting with the things you really think are important to you.
Attitudes, balance, and connections is some of the summary of the primary contributors to consider, explore, to think about as aging well. How to age, better, and the things to think about.
Absolutely. So it's a challenge, and it's something I struggle with. And I'm always interested to hear how people age well, but also how people feel like they, the things that they can do to age better. And I think there's never too early or late a time to start thinking about how to age well.
It's interesting because to me, when I start thinking about those, and I think about my clients, and certainly think about myself, the more connected I get, and I think I can comfortably say probably only in the last few years, where I've really consciously started to actively try and connect, and not only just connect, but appreciate those connections, kind of sit and enjoy those connections, like basking in the connections, enjoying people's time, and kind of reflecting in those moments where, we're all sitting there, we can have a laugh, or, we want to spend time with one another. Our families are coming together. Maybe it's with my children being born. That kind of connectivity has become more and more important. To me, the other side, the attitudes, I think they shift as well. About, we ask these big, huge existential questions. What's it all about? But I like this idea of attitudes around aging. There's almost like aging has always been this bad thing. It's like, how old are you turning? Oh gosh, you're becoming an old man. Right. And when we do that, and that's kind of all lovely and jokey. But at the same time, that can be a sensitive space for many if their attitudes are poor to those, depending on how much emphasis we put on a particular number. And balance is obviously that never-ending juggling act, and maybe also the balance of how we even measure that, how we judge that is do we get stressed when it's imbalanced, or do we kind of accept it and we roll with it, and it doesn't cause us so much angst or grief or anxiety? We kind of go, yeah, that's just a part of life, and I don't have to kind of worry about it being so-called unbalanced, because don't even know what unbalance is, so to speak.
Yeah, I think attitudes play a big role. As a psychologist, that's my approach, at least. I know there's a lot of biology, and there's sometimes people think, it's all about genetics, but I think attitudes can play a very big role, because when we think about aging, we can think of all the negative aspects, but interestingly, after the age of 40, most people don't really feel their age. And in fact, most people report subjectively feeling 20% younger than their actual biological age. So it's almost like we have to remind ourselves, oh yeah, I guess I am older. When I look in the mirror, I guess I don't have as much hair as I used to. But we don't hold that self-opinion. Maybe when we have aches and pains, we say, oh, it's due to aging, but we don't think of ourselves as, as that older person. So that disconnect between how we view ourselves versus how we actually are is important, but it could be for a good reason. That if we feel younger, we'll act younger, we'll feel like we can exercise. We don't subscribe to the stereotypes that we might have about aging. Either that, or we change those stereotypes about aging, because these days people are living longer. There's a lot we can do to age well, and so I've really tried to emphasize that attitude can play a big role in terms of how we approach aging, how we think about aging. And there's a lot we do have control over that allows us to age well.
There's one other topic that I wanted to raise, or item that I wanted to raise, that I wanted to leave to the end, because I know it's always a complex one, but it's a common one that people ask, is around how about food? What does food do with memory and with this aging, component? It seems to be, everywhere where we look, there's, the next superfood or some sort of, nonsense going on. Has your lab, has your research, has the research that you've read on with your colleagues spoken much about this connection? And if so, what are some small little things we can kind of, without getting too carried away, we can kind of be aware of?
No, it's a great question. And I think we're all concerned about, how we eat and, both weight gain, but also, what is the next superfood? And I think the truth is, I talk about this in my book, it's a bit of a moving target. We don't know what is going to be the next superfood, because the truth is most of these foods don't make that much of a difference, whether it's, blueberries or pomegranate juice. If you're eating a balanced diet, that's probably important. Coffee, we don't know if the correlation between coffee and memory is often there, but I wouldn't advise people to drink coffee if they're not drinking coffee. So I think, the nutrition is a bit of a moving target. We used to think, eat egg whites, and now it says, no, eat the yolk. Or it used to be like, used to be don't eat meat. Now it's eat the protein, avoid the hamburger bun. So, I think if you look at this, it's almost like, well, if we don't know, having balance is probably good. It's like your stock portfolio. A little bit of everything is probably a safe way to do it. There might be some breakthroughs here or there, but the truth is, I think that you're going to have bigger effects by eating a balanced diet, eating carefully, eating mindfully, and then, kind of gear up on some physical exercise to burn off any mistakes you might make if you overeat, if you eat the wrong things. So it's almost like you shouldn't get too stressed out about it, because there's a lot you can do. Sometimes there's a link between red wine and memory, but that effect is not very large, and it's certainly not due to the alcohol in red wine. It's due to some small ingredient that you could get in a capsule and probably won't make so much of a difference. So I'm hesitant to suggest multivitamins, and if your doctor suggests it, then maybe it's useful. But in this, if you're living in a world or a country where you can have a fairly balanced diet, I don't see, one superfood is going to make a big difference for your memory.
Well said, I think. That moving target is a lovely summary of the literature just keeps moving and changing, and it's in some sense foolish to point the finger at anything. And most of us probably have a reasonable idea of what a reasonable, balanced, food intake might look like, and we can kind of just keep fluffing around with that, and we'll get it reasonably okay.
I think so.
Alan, can you tell us where people can get in contact, where people can find out about your new book, Better with Age, The Psychology of Successful Aging?
Absolutely. It's available on Amazon.com. And it's a summary of a lot of the research I've talked about today, the latest research on successful aging, as well as case studies, people who have aged well and what they have to say about what tips they would give about aging well. And some of the tips they give certainly kind of fit with the science of successful aging, but some of them don't. And I think that leaves the avenue open that there's a lot we don't know about aging. And so I'm always excited to hear from people who have some insights and ideas about what it means to age well. And this book is meant for people of all ages. I think, if you're 70, 80, 90, some of these things you'll know about, or if you don't know, it might make sense, or maybe it's something to think about. But it's really geared towards people who are of any age, 40, 50, 60, who, haven't spent time thinking about it, but maybe are concerned that their memory is changing, or they see their parents' memory changing. They haven't thought about balance or falls until someone experiences a fall. So I really hope this book has the potential to help people, maybe even before they need the help, to become more aware that we do have control over how well we age.
And I must say, I can definitely go out and recommend a book like this, because I think we need to be thinking more about this. We need to be considering more of these ideas. We need to go out and chew the fat on these concepts, because if we just kind of leave it to chance, we're not being active in the direction we want to push our life. And I think the title is a beautiful title, about successful aging. This is about going out and looking at, how do I do it well? And how do I want to go out and, squeeze the juice out of these years? Because it's not about having a great early life and then there's this decline. There's change in life, and let's go out and get the most out of, every year possible. And there's, I think, some beautiful advantages that older age gives us. So why not go out and start thinking about this? So, Great speaking with you, and really looking forward to finding out more about your lab and the work that comes out. It's great to have people like you who can inform the rest of us as to what to go out and do. The A's, B's, and C's, beautifully packaged as well. So appreciate your time, Professor Castel, and I want to just also wish you some successful aging yourself.
Thank you. I'm sure I'll need it. It was great being on your show.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review, subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.